Tatu mpaka Ijumaa, moja kwa moja kutoka VOA Swahili.
Hello, I'm Africa 54 Managing Editor Vincent McCory. Welcome to Africa 54. Here's what's coming up. The Red Cross pressures Hamas for access to hostages the militants seized during a violent attack on Israelis more than a week ago. Liberia braces for a presidential election runoff between incumbent George Weah and the leading opponent Joseph Boakai. And the RBM Partnership to End Malaria welcomes the world's second malaria vaccine, but warns that it's not the only solution. All that and much more coming up on Africa 54. We begin in the Middle East, where fighting has broken out again Tuesday along the border between Lebanon and Israel. Israeli forces and armed groups in Lebanon engaged in a series of skirmishes. An anti-tank missile fired from Lebanon landed in the town of Metula in northern Israel Tuesday morning, injuring 3 people. Meanwhile, thousands of people desperate to leave Gaza are gathering in Rafah, which has the territory's only border crossing to Egypt. Mediators are working toward an agreement to let aid in and refugees with foreign passports out. The Gaza Health Ministry says nearly 2,800 Palestinians have been killed. More than 1,400 Israelis have been killed, and at least 199 others, including children, were captured by Hamas and taken into Gaza, according to Israel. Multiple explosions and clouds of smoke were seen across the Gaza skyline Tuesday as Israel prepared to escalate the war with a ground offensive against Hamas militants. The impending ground war is triggering a humanitarian crisis in Gaza and raised fears of a broader conflict with Iran. Israel is vowing to exterminate Hamas. Israel has ordered Gazans to evacuate from the northern half of the Gaza. Residents fleeing the north are jammed into southern areas such as Khan Yunis, but bombing there continues too. Now, the International Committee of the Red Cross is pressuring Hamas to give it access to nearly 200 Israeli hostages that its militants kidnapped more than a week ago. Linda Gradstein reports from Tel Aviv on how hundreds of Israeli civilians have set up a war room in a desperate effort to find the hostages.
For families and friends, a wall of heartbreak. The faces of some of the 199 or more civilians kidnapped and taken into Gaza hang outside Israel's Defense Ministry headquarters as a reminder they're still missing. Among the kidnapped are young children and older adults. The families of the hostages have banded together to pressure the government to bring their relatives home.
They took his wife, my aunt, Adina Moshe, 70 years old. She's sick. They took it out of the windows. And then we didn't know what happened to her until hours later we get from many people that show us the movie that's here between 2 terrorists, cruel terrorists who killed her husband, and they took her on a motorcycle to Gaza Strip.
The families say that for more than a week, no representative for the government has met with them. But private Israelis sprang into action. They call it the War Room for the Missing, and they opened it at the Tel Aviv Expo Center. Here, hundreds of volunteers look online for any shred of evidence about the fate of the hostages. Until the war started, many were members of a group called Brothers in Arms, one of the organizations behind 9 months of mass protests against the Israeli government's planned judicial overhaul. Now the group has turned its attention to finding the hostages.
Israeli citizens from all kinds of different sectors, from technology, from interrogation, from intelligence, from social networks, are gathered here to try to create a full image of what's going on.
Nahon, an information systems professor at Reichman University, says information they've gathered leads them to believe that more than 100 of the hostages are still alive. She sends the information found by her volunteers to the Israeli security services.
We found a lot of information about people in social media, some cases we understand that they were murdered, and then it's our job to update that we got new data. In other cases, we see that they're alive, and we see them write online that they survived the event and what they're doing at the moment. And in other cases, we bring it to further research if we don't have enough data.
He says the public's response makes him proud of his country. Citizens have supplied food to soldiers, helped tens of thousands of Israelis displaced from their homes near Gaza, and provided psychological help for those dealing with trauma.
When you see people just gather around and do whatever needs to be done at the moment to be strong and to win this situation, for me this is my greatest source for being optimistic.
Israel is poised for a ground invasion of Gaza, but many Israelis say that getting the hostages back is their first priority. Linda Gradstein, VOA News, Tel Aviv.
Now for more on the Israeli-Hamas conflict, correspondent Jan Boakai is just outside Gaza in southern Israel, reporting from Sderot. Jan, what are you seeing and hearing from your location?
Well, this was another day full of violence around here. I was very close to the border with Gaza, and from there I was just 3 kilometers from Gaza. We could see a lot of bombs being dropped over Gaza. We could see a lot of smoke rising, and the death toll there just reached 3,000 people. On this side, 1,400 people, and there's no sight that this conflict will ease in the next days. The Israeli government and Hamas say they don't have a ceasefire. They didn't. There's nothing agreed to let the foreigners leave Gaza or the humanitarian aid to enter Gaza.
So at the moment as we speak, what has been the official response on allowing some kind of humanitarian aid into the region?
There were a lot of diplomatic talks the last days and the last hours, but it's nothing clear so far. The Egyptian government said it won't allow the refugees into Egypt, and the region of Rafah, the crossing border, it's being bombed by Israel in the last hours. So there's no agreement so far. Nobody knows what's going to happen, and the UN saying that the situation in Gaza it's catastrophic. They say that there's no food anymore, and there's a chance that a lot of disease will start spreading there because of there are a lot of bodies there. There's no water and there's no electricity. So the situation is really, really difficult, and there's nobody knows what's going to happen in the next days.
Has Hamas said anything about the hostages?
Well, they kept with the hostage. The number went up to 199. The Israeli government says that for sure more than 100 are alive. And Hamas said they will negotiate if Israel stops bombing Gaza, stop preparing for a ground invasion. But that's probably it's not going to happen. Israel, it's attacking, and it's probably preparing for this ground invasion. So the situation also, it's unclear what's going to happen to those hostages there.
Well, Jan, thank you very much. That's a VOA correspondent, Jan Boakai, reporting live from Sderot in Israel. Now, U.S. President Joe Biden is slated to visit Israel Wednesday as a humanitarian crisis grows in the Gaza ahead of an unexpected ground invasion by Israeli forces. President Biden is expected to reiterate a clear message to any actor, state or non-state, trying to take advantage of this crisis to attack Israel. Don't, he says. To support that view, Biden is deploying 2 U.S. aircraft carrier groups and other military assets to the region. VOA's Michael Brown reports.
President Biden's arrival comes as Israeli forces are staging near the Gaza border. So far, more than 1,400 Israelis, 2,800 Palestinians have been killed in the war. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken spoke about Biden's trip after his marathon 7.5-hour meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu Monday.
He's coming here at a critical moment for Israel, for the region, and for the world. And he's coming here to do the following. First, the President will reaffirm the United States' solidarity with Israel and our ironclad commitment to its security. Second, President Biden will underscore our crystal clear message to any actor, state or non-state, trying to take advantage of this crisis to attack Israel. Don't. To that end, he's deployed 2 aircraft carrier groups and other military assets to the region.
Blinken said the president will hear from Netanyahu on how Israel will conduct its operations in a way that minimizes civilian casualties and enables humanitarian assistance to flow to civilians in Gaza in a way that does not benefit Hamas. National Security Council spokesman John Kirby told reporters that after Biden's stop in Tel Aviv, he is going to Jordan, where he will meet with King Abdullah and the presidents of Egypt and the Palestinian Authority. Michael Brown, VOA News.
Well, for more on President Biden's visit to Israel, let's go to VOA White House Bureau Chief Patsy Widakuswara. Hello, Patsy. What else can we expect from President Biden's visit to Israel?
I think those goals that has been outlined by Secretary Anthony Blinken, those are really difficult and challenging goals, right? Like the showing of solidarity for Israel, that's one thing, but creating this kind of humanitarian corridor, that of negotiations, not just Israel, but also with the surrounding countries. That's why President Biden is meeting with President al-Sisi of Egypt, as well as King and Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas. And the other thing is that, President Biden is really there kind of show of force, a show of deterrence to send a message to other actors to contain the conflict. Not why he is there. That's why those military assets are.
Yeah, and obviously they were experiencing technical challenges, but Patsy, if I may follow up on that, there are so many issues now. There's the hostage situation. There's a humanitarian crisis that is growing in the Gaza region. How is that challenging the U.S. position, while at the same time, lending its support to Israel, promising to be there with Israel all the way?
It's clearly a really difficult threat to weave, right? I mean, on one hand, there is no doubt that the president wants to show Israel what he calls an ironclad commitment to Israel's security. He has never criticized, Israeli response. He's not advocating restraint, but also at the same time, there are all these negotiations underneath in ensuring that there's some sort of a corridor that's being worked on right now, and there's. So this kind of idea that Israel has its own ability to determine its military operation. So this is certainly something difficult for President Biden. And at the same time, he's also facing all these criticisms from the world, from the global South, and saying that the U.S. really doesn't care about casualties, civilian casualties, as much as Israeli casualties. Now, the White has consistently said that they mourn for every loss of life and that the amount of casualties that acceptable is zero. Still, this is a very situation politically for President Biden, both domestic in terms of America's role in this conflict as well as in the world.
Well, Patsy, thank you very much. That's VOA White House Bureau Chief Patsy Widakuswara. On to Asia now, where the Third Belt and Road Forum for International Cooperation is being held Tuesday and Wednesday in China. Kenya's President William Ruto is set to ask Beijing for a $1 billion loan to complete stalled road construction projects. As according to Kenya's Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua, the Chinese loans, which stand at more than $8 billion, were used by former President Uhuru Kenyatta's government to construct infrastructure like roads, but many of these projects have since stalled after contractors left over unpaid bills. Africa was a focus on President Xi Jinping's ambitious Belt and Road Initiative, launched in 2013 to recreate the ancient Silk Road and extend China's geopolitical and economic influence through a global infrastructure development push. Well, we're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54 and all our VOA Africa programs on our website at voaafrica.com. Still to come, the latest on Liberia's presidential election. We'll be right back. In other news, Niger's military regime says 6 soldiers and 31 court terrorists were killed amid fighting in the Talabere region plagued by insurgents linked to Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State group. Talabere is in the vast and unstable border region between Niger, Mali and Burkina Faso. Chad is calling for the world to step up and help feed the country and its big refugee population, including 460,000 fleeing the conflict in neighboring Sudan. Chad's Economic Prosperity and International Partnerships Minister says the international community should strengthen and support its humanitarian response plan for the Central African country. And Kenyan Facebook content moderators say settlement talks to resolve a labor lawsuit against Meta, the parent company, have collapsed, setting the stage for a renewed court battle. In March, 184 moderators dismissed by Summer, a company contracted by Meta to review Facebook posts, brought a lawsuit claiming unfair dismissal. Well, it appears that Liberia's presidential election is heading for a runoff between incumbent President George Weah and his main challenger, Joseph Boakai. David Doyle has more.
Liberia's President George Weah and opposition leader Joseph Boakai are virtually neck and neck as they race for the presidency. Provisional election results showed on Sunday. Weah holds a slim lead, the Electoral Commission said, with 43.8% of the vote. That's according to tallied results from nearly 3/4 of polling stations. Former Vice President Boakai was on 43.54%. If neither secures 50% of the vote, then the election will head to a runoff. Weah is a beloved soccer star who went from the slums of Monrovia to playing for some of the world's biggest clubs. But critics say he has failed to get a grip on corruption or tackle Liberia's enduring economic hardship in his first 6 years. Weah, who has built hospitals and introduced free education, says the global health crisis set his plans back. Boakai argues that he is needed to rescue Liberia from what he calls mismanagement under Weah.
That was David Doyle of Reuters reporting. Well, it's time now for a health segment, and joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Mudu. Hello, Lino.
Hello, Vincent, and good day, everyone. The UN World Food Programme says it needs $500 million in funding to address food shortages in South Sudan. The majority of South Sudanese people are suffering from food insecurity due to violence in some parts of the country and the impact of climate change. That's according to the agency. The UN says more than 300,000 people have arrived in South Sudan and there is not enough food in stock to feed them. Aid agencies say many people in the country were depending on food imports from Sudan, but due to the fighting there, many of the residents are fleeing to South Sudan. The WFP says the lack of funding is making it difficult to provide food to those who are in need.
Conflict in Sudan is also disrupting markets in South Sudan, and the broader flow of food and fuel. So we're seeing increases in prices in markets that would rely on trade routes from Sudan into South Sudan. And of course, that makes food unaffordable for more people. We are faced with very acute funding shortages. In fact, over the next 6 months, we are short of $500 million in our budget. That means that we are reducing the number of people that we can assist. The people that we are assisting are only receiving half rations.
That was Sean Hughes, South Sudan Deputy Director of the World Food Programme. Now, an estimated 247 million people were infected with malaria in 2021, and nearly 620,000 of them died, according to the World Health Organization. Malaria is a life-threatening disease caused by parasites transmitted to people through the bites of infected female mosquitoes. Most of the victims were children under 5 in Africa in 2001. They always are in Africa. Children under 5 have the most victims of malaria. They accounted for nearly 80% of all malaria deaths in the WHO African region. The RBM Partnership to End Malaria is welcoming the WHO's recent recommendation of the world's second malaria vaccine. For more insight, I spoke with Dr. Michael Adekunle Charles, the CEO of the RBM Partnership. Take a look.
So I think a lot of progress has been made in terms of where we've come from, but we've stalled in the last few years. We've stalled for various reasons. The first one is the issue around insecticide resistance. The mosquito is continuously evolving and is really creating resistance to the existing tools. So the nets, the impregnated nets, has been resistant to that. It's been resistant to medication as well. So that's number one. Number two is the issue of the linkages between climate change as well as health and malaria. We've seen in recent years or in recent months, the cyclones in Mozambique, for example. When the cyclone hits, there's a lot of stagnant water. We see that that's a perfect breeding ground for mosquitoes. Cases go up. So that's a second thing. The third thing is around financing. You need financing to be able to get to the bottom of this and to be able to support the existing work that is happening in terms of innovation and new tools that are coming out. And then the fourth one is the issue of insecurity. And we're seeing that a lot on the continent in terms of insecurity, in terms of instability. And obviously that affects the communities. It affects the healthcare infrastructure, and obviously it drives malaria cases up as well.
And the WHO just recommended the use of the R21 malaria vaccine, which was developed by Oxford University. What is your reaction to this new vaccine?
Well, we welcome the new vaccine with open arms, because that, again, is another tool that we can use to save many, many, many children on the African continent and beyond. And that's a complement to the RTSS that was also approved last year. With the RTSS, we have basically about 18 million doses, supporting 12 countries. This is not enough. We must also emphasize that vaccine alone will not change everything, because we know that the efficacy is not 100% yet. We know the vaccine is only targeting children under the age of 5. So we need to continue to use the existing tools, the bed nets, the insecticide residual spraying, the medication that we're using. All this combination of commodities, of tools, will help us in the fight against malaria, will help us drive down the burden, and will help us save the millions and thousands of lives that we need to save to get rid of malaria.
When we know that countries like the United States have been able to really win the war against malaria, what is the problem with the African continent?
Well, I think it's a multiple of factors. The first one, fighting malaria is not a one-sector fight. It's a multi-sectoral approach. So as long as we still have the stagnant waters, as long as we still have breeding sites for mosquitoes, the mosquito will continue to breed. And so, yes, we're fighting it on the medical side in terms of the vector control issues. But again, I think on the multi-sectoral aspect, we need to fight it. That's number one. The second aspect is that the longer we wait, the mosquito is very clever and it keeps on evolving. So as we come up with new tools, it will evolve and try to cause resistance. So it's not a static parasite that will say, okay, let's get rid of it. We have one silver bullet, we'll do it. No. So as it evolves, we're also evolving. But I think what we need to do is to get ahead. And with all the new tools that are coming along in the next couple of years, I'm really hoping that we can get ahead. The third aspect is really around the political will and really making sure that we join hands in terms of partnerships, in terms of public-private sector partnerships, in terms of all well-meaning individuals, the NGOs, the civil society organizations, the communities themselves. We need to join forces if we want to defeat this disease.
Why should malaria remain a priority on the global agenda?
Because we've seen the effect that malaria has on our continent. We've seen that a woman has to make a choice between taking her child to hospital to get treated when he or she has fever, vis-a-vis putting food on the table for the family to feed. We've seen the devastation in terms of the economic impact and the amount of days lost in terms of productivity. On the continent, annually, we lose $12 billion of productivity. If we can save that, if we can focus on malaria, if we can drive down the burden of malaria, a lot of that funding can be used for other things, can be used to support education, to support roads, to support poverty eradication. So we feel that malaria is really the entry point, even in terms of strengthening health systems, especially in highly endemic countries. So definitely we cannot give up the fight. Definitely we need to keep on prioritizing for the benefit of our boys and girls and our mothers and fathers and the most vulnerable people on the African continent and beyond.
That's our health report for today. To stay in touch, find me on X, formerly Twitter, @LenoreMoudou. Back to you, Vincent.
Well, thank you very much, Lenore. Now be sure to watch for Lenore Moudou's health reports every Tuesday right here on Africa 54. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us in Washington, thanks for watching.
In times of change, when the world seems uncertain and what we hear doesn't reflect what we see, we seek the truth. When we are told only part of the story, we lose trust. In moments of crisis, our dreams, hopes, and wishes for a better tomorrow depend on a free press. At Voice of America, we bring you the stories that people take risks to see. We connect the world and unite it with truth. At Voice of America, we show you the whole picture.